Trond Hjorteland is going to tell us about human-centered system design. Have fun.
Thank you. So me between this and the party, that's going to be challenging. And also another social sciences talk. Are you ready for that? Cool. A different perspective. For who you were at the previous presentation, you might notice some differences. And it's not about who's wrong or who's right, because that's not what systems are, right? It's a perspective on thing. The model here is going to be slightly different. See if you can pick up on the differences. Because that's an interesting mind game that you can have. But I just want to say first, I have done a few talks at the DDD conference. I have yet to talk about DDD, which is kind of ironic. And I've always thought, am I the odd one out? But yeah, the previous talk showed that no, I'm not. And also Marco has been clear about KanDDDinsky being, even it has DDD in the name, it's not really a pure DDD conference. It covers a lot more of that. And also, we had a talk earlier today about collaboration, right? So it's a lot about social things. And that's the introduction I'm going to have here, is that why it's centered on human-centered, is that I think we are kind of good at the technical things. And because we have what I refer to as a technical imperative. We come from a STEM background, so we like technology, we like techniques, and we think that's going to solve a lot of good things, like AI, for example, right? But we tend to not ignore the social, and think the DD community is better than most, I think, like including the social. But there are things there that we might miss. So I have spent a lot of time in social sciences the last couple of years. I'm not a social scientist, just like Kevin Henry said he wasn't a psychologist. I come from IT, and I've done that, so I've just a keen interest in social sciences. So I want to share with you a lot of tidbits from history. And I think even though that this is going to end up, as I said in the abstract, it sort of forms what has become open system theory. There's a lot of things here I think you can take with you, which also include like collaboration and whatever. Because it's psychology, it's human interaction and all that. This is what we're going to get into today. And we're going to use a couple of landmarks during history. So it's kind of a history lesson, but I'm going to pick up a couple of things going back to actually before the war. And we're going to highlight a few of these landmarks that sort of change the direction of social sciences, and even that affects us today. Sitting here, we talk a lot about teams, for example. Where do you think that came from, for example? You're going to get information on that. So we're going to follow this map. So a lot of this talk is taken from that presentation, from this map. From this paper by Merle Emery, called the evolution. Oh, that was laggy. Evolution of open system theory. So we're going to go back in history and see what sort of things that sort of underpins what became open system theory. We're not going to go through everything. I just want to highlight firstly that we're going to focus on the top one. You see there are like three swim lanes almost. Not going to focus too much on the lower one, and there's a reason for that, because that is human relations, HR. People know about human relations, right? If you work in a company, you had some idea what the human relations are. And the difference between human relation thread, which is the bottom and then the top one, the bottom one is human relation, the top one is social technical systems. And the difference is, I'm going to make the difference clear later on, but HR has a focus on changing the people. Right? Just looking at the social bits, while the top one, the social technical, is looking at the technical and the social together. So it's a different strands. So that's why they're different lanes. But let's go all the way back to 1940. Some studies were made by this guy, Kurt Lewin. He wasn't the only one. There was also Lippitt and White. Oh, the resolution was terrible, I think. But anyway, they were doing something they called group climate studies. They were doing experiments with a set of schoolboys, groups, boys. And they were interested to figure out how does the leadership style affects how the people behave. So they were going out testing authoritarian style and a democratic style. That was the intention. What they discovered was there was a third. And the reason was that I think it was Lippitt, who misunderstood what democracy was. So they had this group of boys. They were assigned some tasks, and then the leader comes in and say, the authoritarian leader tells them how to do things, like describe them in sort of the minute detail how to do things. That's the authoritarian style. And then a democratic style, which is a little bit misunderstood, is that you go in with the team and do it together with them. You help them, support them. Lippitt didn't do that. He went in, assigned them, and there you go. Do whatever you want. You figure it out. That was what he did. And they saw that the behavior of the group was very different from the other two. So they coined that as laissez-faire. Anything goes. That was their reaction to that. So these studies, the results was that if you have an authoritarian system, it was productive, but it was very dependent on the leader. If the leader left the room, productivity went almost to zero. It's like people couldn't do anything. They needed the leader there to help them. They weren't self-organizing at all. The democratic one, they could work easily without a leader, because they had sort of internalized what to do anyway. Of course, they had some support from the leader because he was part of the team, but they were productive. But they also enjoyed that they had better quality, and they were actually more productive than the authoritarian one. And then what about laissez-faire? Worst of them all. And the hypothesis was that they had a confusion there. There was no guidance. They were doing, and people were reacting differently to sort of the. What were they going to do when the leader wasn't there to help them? They were in fights, so the productivity was actually worst in the laissez-faire. So that were studies in 1940. Then we move forward to this guy. Those of you who have seen me before probably know that I've talked about Eric Trist quite a few times. He was part of the Tavistock Institute in London. And he was very inspired by Levin. So he knew well about these studies. The Levin studies were done in America. They even collaborated with Kurt Lewin. So they even had a journal together that called Human Relation, ironically. But yeah, so there was a collaboration there. So they brought the knowledge of the team dynamics into the research that they did at the Tavistock Institute. And that's where they looked into these coal mines. You probably heard of that. Right? So if you've listened to me, I've talked about the coal studies a lot. They noticed after the war, that was really important for them to get the industry going. That coal industry was essential after the war. And they tried to sort of introduce the mechanization and industrialization of the coal mines. Right? They were introducing technology to it. And the introduction of the technology meant that the people had to change in order to work with this new technology. But the thing is that the efficiency wasn't as expected. Actually, it turned out to be worse than before. People weren't happy. There was a lot of absenteeism, sick leaves, people got injured, there was a lot of accidents, and all that kind of stuff. So they did not get the expected productivity increase after that. And what they saw is that, but there was a couple of seams, like a couple of coal mines, that managed to do better anyway. So that's where Eric Trist comes in. And why did some of these teams make it better than others? And the difference was that they were self-organizing teams. Like in the what they call long wall is where there is you have to have a lot of people to work it, to move the equipment and all that stuff, and you had to have shifts in order to do it. Like with the short wall, it was possible for teams to do it themselves. So they reorganized. They said, no, we're not going to have shifts that leaves shit to the next shift, right? So they sort of agreed, okay, let's reorganize so we own the whole process as a team. So that was the discovery there. And that he coined, or actually he says that the coal miners themselves coined it, sociotechnical system design was born. Because you need to optimize both for the technical and the social, you can't do it separate. They tried HR there, by the way, to improve it. Made no change, no difference. It's only when they are in charge of doing the redesign of the work themselves, it's where sort of the improvements comes about. And that's the joint optimization of sociotechnical system. It's a tricky word, but it means that you have to look at the social aspects and the technical aspects together and jointly optimize them. You can't do either. The technical one is, of course, what we know as scientific management. And the social one is HR. So social technical is a new thing. That was coined back in '51. We move on forward. So that's one of the landmarks. All right, let's move on. Then there was this guy, an Austrian, Trond Hjorteland. He was a sort of well-known system thinker, was into like general system theory, for example, but he was really trying to understand what systems are. And he was a biologist. So he noticed that in biology, you can't treat an organism as a closed system. It has to relate to its environment to survive. So that's where the first term open system comes about. It's there. But he didn't view the environment in any particular manner. It was just there. The environment was just going about its own business, right? The organism was there. The environment, it was like it was just there. There was no conceptualization of it. It was just there. But the idea from him was brought back to the Tavistock Institute, and specifically by this guy, Fred Emery. He was really inspired by open systems theory from Hjorteland, and he looked at, okay, let's combine this with the social system that we've seen in the coal mines. How can these two be combined? For open system theory, was very specific about. Oh, sorry, the Hjorteland's open system theory was very about animals and stuff like that, but not social systems. Animate system, but not social system. So what Fred Emery did, he was trying to join that into how does that play out in a social system? That paper from 1959. And then, after the discovery of sociotechnical system design in the British coal mines, they weren't getting ahead there. There was a lot of interesting discoveries made, but when they tried to actually sort of implement these things or try them out to experiment, it didn't go. The leaders, for example, in the coal mines weren't happy with this at all. They were losing power, right? Self-organizing teams there didn't match their way of working things. So they were not happy. Even the first paper from 1951, if you ever read it, bear that in mind, that was heavily censored. They were not allowed to write what they actually discovered because of it. Because it was so controversial, they didn't want to hear about it. But in Norway, egalitarian Norway, different. Why? Because the Norwegians care deeply about democracy. So after the war, the industrialization was starting to kick off in Norway as well, but people weren't taking it, right? They kept bringing in industrialization and telling people what to do. No, doesn't go here. So there was a lot of strikes, and there was a lot of aggravation. No, so even the government was involved. How can we bring democracy to the workplace? Was sort of the approach. So they wanted to start a project, and this was the Industrial Democracy Program. And this guy, Einar Thorsrud, Norwegian name, Einar Thorsrud, he was asked to actually do some experiments and figure out how can we reintroduce democracy into the industrialized work environment. And he knew very well about what had happened in England, so he brought in Fred Emery. So they started what then was the project. It started in 1962, went until 1967. And there they actually were able to experiment. So they tried out different things. First, they tried representative democracy, like you're having the workers have some representative in the boards and stuff like that. Had some effect, but not enough. And then they tried these self-organizing teams. That had a huge effect. They had four central companies in Norway where they tried it. They didn't reorganize the whole thing, but they did some attempts at that. So certain sections were done, and they had great numbers. Actually, the numbers I'm going to come back to tomorrow for those of you who want to hear the second talk about this thing. So I'm not going to go into that, but the numbers were excellent. Everything was good. So why was it good? And this is also something that sort of came about during these experiments. They noticed there is some needs. Humans have some intrinsic needs, not just external needs. External needs are like pay, security, and all that stuff, which the HR usually focuses on. Right? Or you have a certain amount of rest and so many hours that you should work and all that stuff. That's HR. But people have intrinsic motivators. Remember, this was 1960s. When was Pink's book come out? 2009 or something? You probably heard of Daniel Pink. Most of you probably have, yeah? Mastery, Purpose, and Autonomy. This was discovered in the Industrial Democracy Program. They identified 6. We're going to go through these because these are really important. Every person at a job wants some sort of elbow room. I think they called it autonomy initially, but they changed it to elbow room because autonomy is like not a precise word for it. So you need to have something that you feel it's yours. You own it. You control it. That's the elbow room. And it shouldn't be too much, and it shouldn't be too little. So there's a balance. The same goes for variety. You want to have a variety in your job. Again, not too much, because that's stressful. Not too little, because that's just putting nuts on bolts, right? So you want some variety in your job. And you want to learn on the job. And the learning includes setting goals and getting feedback. Rings any bells, anyone, right? We know this all too well. This was 60s, in the 60s. So we have known all this stuff for a long time. All these, again, all these 3 are like personal needs that we have, and they are balanced. You don't want too much and too little of them. Same goes for learning on the job. If you learn too much, cognitive overload, which we know from cognitive theory, right? But that's the first 3, and they are very personal. And then it's the more social aspects in a team, for example. There's 3 more. First one is meaningfulness. Your work has to have there has to be some social usefulness to it. It shouldn't be just be a job that you're embarrassed about. It should be something that you can actually talk about at the pub and be proud about. And you want to see the whole product. You just don't want to see just one little part. You want to see what's your part in the whole. That's meaningfulness. And you want mutual support and respect from your colleagues. And that goes both ways, of course. You should be respectful and mutual support from your colleagues as they have to you. And also you want this job to lead somewhere. It shouldn't be a dead-end job. Right? You shouldn't do the same thing over and over again. You want to increase your learning, as you had over there, but also there should be a career path. You shouldn't be stuck in a job. 6 intrinsic motivators that was discovered during experiments on the way. That sort of, if you measure these, you know how well people are doing. Right? It's a really good measure for that. So if we go back to the history, what came out of the Norwegian program was 2 things, like the 6 criteria, for example, but also something they call the 9-step model, which is a way to, if you want to reorganize a hierarchical industrialized organization into sort of this self-organizing team, you can use this 9-step model. That was sort of the learning. So the expert comes in and redesigns the organization. You've probably seen there is a gotcha here. I'm going to get back to it later. This was taken to America, and America loved it, especially the expert design. Right? So that's what happened there. But they missed an essential bit, and that came after the Industrial Democracy Program. And that happened with this guy again. He was the major system thinker, basically, of that whole Tavistock bunch. So he looked into something what he called the genotypical organizational design principles. So he tried to distill what they've learned, both in the coal mines and in Norway, about the self-organizing teams. So the teams, there was something about these teams, right? What was special about these teams? Why were they different from the hierarchy they had before? What makes them different? And he conceptualized this into what he referred to as genotypical organizational design principles. Just quickly go through these, because this is definitely the second landmark. The realization that there are 2 different organizational design principles, and only 2. The first one you recognize. I'm going to go quickly through them, but I think maybe some of you have seen this before. Say if you had a set of tasks that needs to be done, and the traditional way is getting people to do that task. And you want to get people that actually is good at doing that task. So you want the match between the person doing it and the task should be a good fit. It makes sense, right? But if you want to save money, and you want it should be easy to replace any people if they leave or if they die or whatever. So you want to reduce the division of labor should be as much as possible so you can easily replace it. But if you do that, nobody sees the whole. So you need supervision. Somebody needs to see across and control that. You have to do that before you do that and all that stuff, right? And supervision also needs that's management, if you know it's management. But in a large organization, of course, you have manager of managers, right? And we know this as the bureaucracy, the autocracy, and that's DP1. And he actually used these terms to say that the driving force behind this model is that you want to have redundancy. Every system should have redundancy. It should be able to survive changes, right? So you need to have some redundancy built into it. This one has the redundancy of parts. If somebody leaves, it should be easily replaced. They are resources, people. Right? I think that's where the term comes from, actually. So that's DP1. So what they discovered in the coal mines, they didn't design it, they discovered it in the coal mines, was the new one called DP2. It doesn't mean anything else than design principle 2, design principle 1. So they are not inventive in the naming here, but that's what it is. But the redundancy here is handled very differently. And that's why it's only 2. Redundancy is handled here by functions, not parts. I'll show you why. If you have these tasks again, they are not one separate task, they are a whole task. Everything that has to be done is grouped together. And the people are doing it as a group. So anyone in a group can do any task. There's no. So so every A here can do everything. So that's the multifunctionality of it. Right? So if A leaves, anyone of B, C, or D can do any task anyway. So it doesn't matter. It's more costly, but you have redundancy than in parts. And also, you would have more of these bubbles, more of these teams in a large organization. But that's the idea, that the team takes sort of, not jumping ahead, but those teams then takes over something really core to the whole thing. If there is a responsibility to do control, coordination, and goal setting, where do you think that lands in DP1? There's only one place it can be. It has to be the supervisor, the manager. Nobody else can take that charge. You see that in an organization today? If you have managers, there's nobody else than the manager who can be responsible for it. It's just part of the structure, right? While here, there's no managers, so the team has to do it. So that's the sort of the distinction. If you go back to the 40s, the experiments, do you recognize things there? Like the Lewin experiments. That one was the authoritarian pattern, right? It was the supervisor, the leader that comes in and tells people what to do. That's DP1. That one is the democratic one. DP2 is the democratic one. So let's go back to the history line again. So we had this. Fred Emery identified these in that paper. Really good paper, by the way, if you want to look into it. Get the explanation why it was what it was. So if we go back to, so this happened during the democracy program. But it didn't go to America, just to say that. The Americans didn't accept the design principles. Why? Because DP2 is like nonsensical there. Because the individual is the core. Here, the team is the core. So it doesn't comply. So it is a cultural thing as well. So probably why it worked in Norway initially, right? And also England. But the point is that the experiments what's done here, at least that's what open system theory sees it. We know what works now. You know how to do this. Let's diffuse. Let's spread this. So the next phase was the diffusion phase. So they started doing, I can just quick explanation to why they're called participative design workshop. Fred Emery, as you've seen pictures of several times now, he's an Australian. So he went to Tavistock in the 50s went to Norway to do the insertion program and returned to Australia in 69. And basically the whole world learned about the experiments in Norway. It was a huge success. So people traveled from everywhere in the world, from Australia and Japan. Just let you know. Also, the Japanese was really interested in what happened in Norway back then. And this was before TPS, Toyota Production System, everything. Haven't found a direct connection, but there's something there. But anyway, he went back, and there was a lot of companies that were really interested in how can we do replicate what you did in Norway, because that sounds so amazing. I mean, the numbers were like unquestionable, but he was only him. So he helped a few people. He did the 9-step model, tried to teach people how to do that whole process, but soon figured out, no, it doesn't play out. People know this already. Why do you need to bring in an expert to do the analysis and design when the people themselves already know it? Why do you have to extract information into an expert, and the expert have to sort of figure out how it works and then design it? Why can't people design it themselves? That's where the participative design workshop came about. So he tried that out, and it worked wonderfully. So the first one was in 1971. And he worked from then on closely with his partner, Marilyn Emery. So they designed something that I think they refer to it as the Golden Book. It's just like a 14-page little book explaining how to do a participative design workshop. So anyone should actually do it. They even said that you basically doesn't have to teach people how to do this. They actually already know it. They just have to have the constraints on what not to do and what to do, and then everyone can do it. So you don't need an expert anymore. The expert is out. What you only need is the facilitator of the process, or the manager of the process, as they call it. Somebody needs to help them to do this. But that's it. It's not involved in the design itself. So that's 1980. And this culminated in a book by Merrill Lennon called Participative Design for Participative Democracy. It's a book that's hard to come by. You can get used copies of it. I got one in the end. I had to buy it like for a gazillion amount of dollars at Amazon. But you can get it freely online. Now, you know that. But on this webpage, the QR code takes you directly to that page. You get all the articles and all the things that are in that book on that webpage, even updated versions of it. So don't bother looking for that book, unless you want to pay, as I said, a lot of money for it. But there you get all the instructions needed to do the participative design workshop, and more, and why it works, and why things don't work, and all that. But that was the top trait that I showed you in the other one. If you go back a few years again, back to 1960, actually before the industrial democracy program in Norway, Fred Emery and then Eric Trist at the Tavistock, they were looking into ways to help companies get a common future for themselves. So they were asked to help out a couple of air engine producers in England. They were merging, and they didn't get along well. So how could we get them to get along and find a common future for themselves? That's when they designed the Search Conference. And that was inspired by some other social scientists way before. Not way before, but somewhat before. And these are the lists that's given here. I'm not going to focus on the top one, but they are a little bit technical and weird, to be honest. But this last one is really interesting. And that connects back to what Levine had discovered in the 40s. This was a psychoanalyst called Wilfred Bryan. He was working at what was then called the Tavistock Clinic. The Tavistock Institute used to be a clinic. They used to treat shell-shocked soldiers from the war, or PTSDs, right? And he was probably the first one to try group therapy. And he noticed some interesting effects of having a leader in a team, as a doctor and a patient in a group. How do people react to having a leader? And he discovered something they called basic assumptions. Do you have that slide? I have that tomorrow, probably. Well, it says the group of basic assumptions. So people react differently when there's a leader there. He identified at least 3 patterns. One is dependency, that you get dependent on the leader. The other one is fight-flight, as you probably have heard of. The third one is pairing. He was a psychoanalyst, so pairing, there was a woman and a man getting together to survive in a certain environment. But later they have removed that sexual orientation to it. But what it means is that when the leader is there, and you don't agree, you figure out, you and me, let's figure out how we can do this. That's pairing. So there's distinct reaction to leadership here. And take note of that. If you are a facilitator, if you are a manager or whatever, you can't escape the boss. They call it the boss, basic assumptions. There will always be remnants, and maybe you could be as a benevolent leader as possible, but it's always going to be a boss. That's the discovery. The only way to do what he called working mode, or creative working mode, is leaderlessness. You have to remove the leader. That's the only place you're going to see it. So when he retracted as a doctor, left the group to their own device, of course helped them, you get the creative working mode. That was 1952. So they brought that. So actually, I think I read somewhere that when they ran the first search conference, Emery was running it. Trist was just sitting there noticing where the bass occurred. So they had taken their studies by Bayern. He was also part of the Tavistock then, of course. So they sort of learned how should we do a search conference without having the boss. They needed to get to the working mode. So how could they do that? So then they experimented a lot with the search conference. And out of that work, Trist and Emery discovered that the open system theory, right, you had this environment. The environment wasn't just there. You could conceptualize the environment. That's what I did in this paper from 1967, which is a citation classic. I think I skipped that, did I? See? Yeah, the top one, 62 to 65. I think it was started work in 65, but was published was published in 65. And these different environments, if you look at them, they identified 4. The first one is like just a theoretical one, really. And they also indicated there might be a 5th, but let's look at 3 of them. The first one is what they call placid clustered. There's an environment there where there's enough for everybody. There's no limit. Right? If you want something, you can just go and get it. And it's neutral, there's no bad, there's no good. And it's static, it doesn't change. And you don't need strategy in such an environment. You just go and get whatever you want. Just imagine a competitive market, for example, and there's enough for everybody. You don't need to have strategy in order to go ahead. You can get all what you need. That's placid clustered, type 2. And then you have type 3, which are an interesting change here. Suddenly there is scarcity. There's not enough for everybody. And there's competition comes from that, right? Because everybody want to fight for the same resource or whatever it is. And it's dynamic because it changes, because the competition changes the environment, and everything is like it's in fluid. So you need to be strategic. You know what I know what you know, and you know what I know, and back and forth, right? So you need to be smart in order to get ahead. That's type 3, disturbed reactive, that's called. And then I identified a 4th one, which is even worse. It looks like type 3, but it's also unpredictable. The environment itself changes without having any knowledge about why that happened. So if you heard about emergence, kind of like that, just things pop up that anyone couldn't proceed for it. That they call that turbulence. So just keep those in mind, because we come back to those later. You see? Yeah. They also gave them these environments had some dominance in history. The placid cluster was before the Industrial Revolution. There was basically enough for everybody. Everybody was sort of happy, and there wasn't any competition really. That happened with the Industrial Revolution. Then something happened in the world because of the Industrial Revolution. And then again, suddenly something happened after the war. I'm not going into why there was a change here, but if you read about it, there are some interesting insight to why that changed after the war. But the war was the trigger for that change. So, just quick on the open system theory, because I'm going to show something later that's going to be relevant. So if you have a system, it's a dotted line, so it's an open one, right? So the system is there. There's an open system. There is an environment that the system has to relate to. And here, in this model, you can't disjoint the system from the environment. It doesn't make sense to separate them. If you separate it, or you abstract, you create an abstraction that's not real. You're making a model. So the environment is always there. You can't take it away. And you have to interact, the system has to interact with the environment, but it's cut both ways. And this is what really interesting open system theory was like for me at least, a really insightful thing, is that the environment affects the system. That's obvious, right? But the system also affects the environment, right? It maybe sounds like it's obvious, but if you think about it, the environment doesn't exist without the system. So the environment is completely defined by the systems it's an environment for. I repeat that. The environment doesn't exist unless there are systems that makes it an environment. So this is a way of looking at systems that's really different from probably what you heard about elsewhere. You can't, and it goes back to you can't separate the system from the environment. It's always there. All right. Yeah, and also there's the different types of environment. Like in an organization, in a company, for example, you have a task environment, which is your industry. But what Fred Emery specifically noticed is that, okay, but we are affected by the global environment as well, not just the industry. Like changing feelings in the population. And that's what I noticed after the war. People did not trust their governments anymore. The government was ready to bomb them to oblivion, and there was no limitation to resources. There was enough money to produce the enormous amount of weapons. So obviously, you didn't need a government to control the resource access. So that's all the cultural revolution, all the hippie things that come after the war is an effect of that. People really, really didn't trust authority anymore. Anyway, so that's why type 4 come about. That's one hypothesis of why type 4 come about. Yeah, so we're back here in the history line. So this citation classic, if you go into social science, you're going to encounter that a lot. Not many people take that really on board what they actually say in that paper, though, must be said. But they did. Open system theory, specifically Merrill and Emmy here, worked a lot on that and incorporated that into the search. So the search then is a way to find your way in a very unpredictable environment, which means that they have to do it themselves. Again, it has to be something that the group does on their own. They can perfectly well do it without having an expert on board. And facilitation is only managing the process again for the search, nothing else. So they experimented with that for many, many, many years. And there was an epiphany, but I think it was Merlin who had this. If you notice, there is an arrow coming down from the top here. Whoop, that one. That comes from the participative design workshop inside. But nobody had really connected these two before. They were distinct. Right? There was search conference and a participative design workshop. One was looking for like a strategic planning, which search conference really is, while the participative design workshop is about reorganizing the organization. But what Marilyn noticed is that you have to combine the two. You can't have a search without having a participative design workshop afterward. They have to be connected. And why? Let me show why that is. If you look at this environment, so this was her aha moment. If you look at this model, remember in the open system there are people in it, right? And I think it was Fred Emery and Russell Lakoff who defined a person as an open, purposeful system. So that you yourself are open, and you have a purpose. That's distinguishes it from every other system, mechanical system or animate system, like an animal. So Hjorteland's model is fine for his model, but it doesn't work for social system because people have purposes. There's something they want in their life. They need something more, like the 6 criteria, for example, I showed earlier. So you can't never, in this model, you never equate social system with any of the other system types. They are very, very distinctly different. So what she noticed is that if you have a person in an open system, say a person working in a company or in a team or wherever, they need to interact with the teams, right, or the rest of the organization. But not only that, they need to relate to the industry and also the wider social fields. So they have 3 things they need to relate to. You can't isolate them. When you go to work, you bring yourself to work. You don't leave your personal life at home. That's why you are connected. Everything is connected. So she noticed that if you do, because the search was a really good approach, but the implementation of what came out of the search failed again and again and again. And what I noticed that it wasn't a participative design that was done to the organization. They hadn't reorganized the DP2. Like the search was run as a strict DP2. They was really conscious about that, avoiding bars at all cost, right? Sort of the basic assumptions. But when they were done with the search, we saw like a 2-day exercise, and they come back to the offices, the regular bureaucracy was still there. So everything, pretty much everything that came out of the search conference just dissipated and failed. There was no, it wasn't carried forward. The community that was created in the search, which is what happened when you created our DP2 organization, didn't carry forward. So that was her insight. You have to have a DP-type organization in order to make this work. So the techniques, the search conference, finding the strategic direction, what does this company want to be, what sets us apart from the competition, that is the search. Then you create a set of action plans, what are we going to do now? That has to be handed over to a DP2 organization, i.e. you need to do the participative design workshop if you haven't already done it. Of course, if you have a DP2 organization, you're fine. The search you can run all the time. But if you don't, you have to have the participative design workshop in place. So that was her insight, and that led to her book that called Searching, the first one in '82. And then there is the last version from 1999, which is still available new. You don't have to pay your cost of your firstborn or whatever to get it. It's actually possible to get hold of that. You won't find it online as the other one, by the way, so you have to actually buy that book. So if we go back to this then, these environments, which is really interesting. If you look at the DP1, DP2 type of things there, this one is very much a DP2 style type of environment. DP2 would, and by the way, these illustrations are mine. They are not condoned by Marilyn or anyone else. So they're my interpretation. In a DP type 2 organization, you have a set of groups, right? Here, you have the bureaucracy, DP1. Because it's scientific management, like it's like efficiency to do that and do that. While here, we try to get back to DP2. We are sick and tired of being told what to do. That's what's happening, and that's what Agile is all about. It's a democratization of the weak people at the bottom. But if you see a digital transformation, Agile transformation, they're going to hit the wall, which is the bureaucracy above. You see it again and again and again. So you can make headway, but you won't get all the way there. So that's laissez-faire. Right? Nobody knows who controls what. I've been a project where everything was going perfectly until we kind of struggled a little bit, and then suddenly some manager was showing power and want to show that they can make changes, and then of course the whole optimized sociotechnical system that the team was all gone. You have been ordered around again. Yeah, so that's why open system theory is so interesting, because it's not about what it is, it's about what it does. It takes you from that to that. That's what open system theory. It's based on the old things that we have seen with the group dynamics, the teams, the autonomous teams, and all the insights, but it's used for that. That's what it is. So just want to end with a couple of shout-outs, of course, because I'm so impressed with these two people. Fred Emery died, unfortunately, in 1969. No, sorry, in 97. Sorry, in 97. Marilyn is still chugging along in her 80s, still writing stuff. So if you go to that address, you're going to find new stuff from this year, or even new papers, or modified papers with new insight. And I just want to end with a quote from Marilyn. She's quite direct. She doesn't play around. So what she says is that it is only when people involved in work out their own designs that the necessary motivation, responsibility, and commitment to effective implementation is present. There's no, maybe, yeah, kinda. It's only way. And why? Because the 6 criteria, measuring the 6 criteria, the happiness of people, you only get good review or good numbers on that in a DP2. You never get good in DP1. So they have to be in that setting in order to manage that. Because then they are part of the design, they are committed to it. It's only that, then when that is sort of possible. Right? So that was sort of my quick walkthrough of the history of open system theory. I hope there was some insight that you saw that all the way back to the 40s, there were things that were popping up there that we recognize today. And we still discuss, right? Should a facilitator of an event storming process, should it be involved in the content or shouldn't he or she, for example? If you look at what Levine discovered in the 60s, or sorry, the 40s, no, you shouldn't. Or Bion, even worse, right? People react to authority. They always do. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. And if you are if you're interested in more of this, you can contact me on social media. I still have the Twitter logo there. I don't accept the X, so I'm probably going to leave at some point. But yeah, you can get hold of me there. Since we have a few minutes left? 5 minutes, yes. So we actually have some first time in a long time. I think I actually have some time extra. Any thoughts on this? It's quite radical, I know. But anyone want to jump in? Is this possible? Is it like a wishful thinking that we can get there? Yeah, there's a few hands over there. None here, but many there.
But you are in your system.
Yeah.
I don't know who was first. You first. I was thinking of connecting what Toby said earlier and what you say. At the moment of, you said the bosses needs to leave the system to work.
Yeah.
And this could be the same view as having the observer outside of your system. Because if it's in, it influences the system.
Yeah.
And I experienced this. I had the boss, the best boss ever, who gave us budget and asked after a year why we didn't spend the budget. But he never came during the time asking, hey, how are you? Do you need help? Or something? He asked, but he was from the outside. He let us go.
Laissez-faire.
No, it wasn't laissez-faire because he didn't interact, but he had an eye. This is what good leaders do. They don't leave the room. They observe what happens, and they observe if they need to interact.
Just let me quickly explain what I think that's laissez-faire. You may disagree here, though, but the authority is still there with the boss. Everybody knows it. You know that this boss, he or she may be nice, like playing it nice and being like protective of the team, but you know that's because of his or her ability to work against the system that's happening. So if that boss was replaced by an authoritarian, you're back to what you used to be, right? So there is still confusion. The people in the team are still, right? They're not quite sure. Do I dare to speak up now, or maybe I'm stepping on somebody's toes? So,
and this is what didn't was like this. So yes, if he would have been changed, the context would have been changed.
Yeah.
But no one in the team was afraid of speaking up as long as he was on the paper. So this was the difference. It was really a freedom and an autonomy helped and was clear that it is not a question of fears.
All right. First, to quickly answer you, we never talked about hierarchy in my talk. So that's a whole different beast. I was intrigued. You said that people inside of the open system have purpose. Where does that come from?
Oh, I think I briefly mentioned Aikoff at some point. It comes from him, I actually believe. But it goes back also quite a bit. But he was a student of a guy called Singer.
No, I meant, where does the purpose come from?
The purpose comes from people.
Okay.
People have purposes.
Do they make that up?
There are something that you want out of life, right? There's something that what you feel is wrong or right. There's something that you want out of things, right? So if you go to work, if you have to submit yourself all the way, you leave your purpose outside the door, that's going to be not going to be a jointly optimized social technical system.
Oh, so the necessities that you talked about earlier, that's what creates purpose.
Yeah, you can't ignore the purpose that
makes
people
perfect
have.
sense.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll go to first.
So, a stupid way to ask the question is, does it work outside of Norway?
A really good one.
No, the better way to ask is how much the cultural influences are changing this. When I said it was blocked in going into United States, so there might be something that prevents this. So how much is the cultural aspect? blocking or?
Some of the researchers are clear about that is substantial. Like somebody even believes that America is lost. You can't make it work there. While in Scandinavia, in Europe, Australia has a good history. Sweden has done a lot of cool things on this. So there is a cultural aspect to it. But tomorrow I'm going to go through some more of the what's the effects of having a DP1 style organizations? How does that affect us and the world in general? And research done there shows that mental health is seriously affected by it. But it's based on what people need, and there was only 2 parameters that sort of was affected. That wasn't about people and their needs, and there was demographics and personalities. There's only 2 parameters of like a number of 18 or something like that. So it's there, but it's less than we believe. Okay. And then we think it is. Yeah, there's actually some.
There is the story of Numi, which is a company that was from General Motors before, was the worst of General Motors. Toyota took the management of that. It became the best factory of General Motors in just 2 years, with exactly the same people inside. So the culture doesn't matter in this. It didn't go to America because if you do DP2, the managers don't have control anymore. That's something that in America they don't want to do.
Yeah. Mark? Okay, I can do one more. Is that, yeah, but we're heavy over, so this has to be the last one.
In this open system, you have the many teams. Does it work in any type of company? Because if you're a Volkswagen and one of the teams makes the tires and decides we're going to make bicycle tires from now on, that's going to be a weird car.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, I didn't go into that, but when you have transition to DP2, then it's all the teams that redesign. If they need to change, then it's a redesign they do the redesign. There is no expert or a leader doing the redesign anymore. So if they've decided now, we're going to stop making cars, we're going to make bicycles, they have to redesign themselves in order to do that. So if you have dynamic reteaming, it's in the same space, kind of. Right. And actually, there are good examples from the car industry in Sweden. There was especially 2 companies in Uddevalla, Volvo, Uddevalla, and what's the other one, Kalmar. They redesigned the whole production process from having like the Fordian way of doing it, like this is sequential. They had teams building cars from A to Z. The teams were doing everything. It's not there anymore, of course, because of efficiency, because it costs more. That's the thing. This model costs a little bit more. Because you have the redundancy of function parts. Yes, I think that's now over time. Thank you.